Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine created by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy and carried on for well more than a decade now as we spread the word of common sense across the Commonwealth of Virginia. And thank you for letting us be of service to you. You can find us online at virginiainstitute.org. YouTube channel under the title Freedom and Prosperity Radio has previous editions of this program easily downloadable, and you can listen back to it. I once queried somebody who said they were a democratic socialist. I said, but isn't all socialism democratic? Because it's the classic two wolves and a sheep voting on what they'll have for dinner. That said, the election and the protection of that is an underpinning of our representative republic, and one of the great minds in that realm from the Heritage Foundation is their senior legal fellow and election law reform initiative director, Hans Von Spakovsky, and he's on for our first guest this week. Hans, welcome back to the program. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me back.
Well, this story, and when I saw the press release last week from the League of Women Voters and the ACLU, they actually sent out separate ones, I guess figuring, nothing succeeds like excess. It's calling on Virginia to drop their requirement that there be a witness signature on any absentee ballots voted by mail. I said, this has just gone into electric loony land. We've got, the CARES Act first iteration had vote harvesting in it, all sorts of, insane things that we never would have talked about 5 months ago, never mind 5 years ago.
Well, you're right about that, and there's no reason to relax or get rid of the rules that are in place in Virginia that are there to help secure absentee ballots. Because unfortunately, absentee ballots are the easiest ballots to steal. They're the easiest ballots with which to intimidate voters in their homes. And I should point out that. For all the folks who say that, we just can't have a regular election, I would point out that Wisconsin just did that, had a regular election, they had polls open, they did allow people to vote by absentee ballot, and guess what? The turnout in their primary at the beginning of April, it was almost essentially equivalent to the turnout in the 2008 presidential primary when we had a very hot race going on between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
It's proof that we will do it. I mean, as many of my listeners have said, how come I can go to Kroger but I can't go vote?
Yeah. That's exactly right, Joe. All of us are going to the grocery store. I went to Home Depot last weekend. Everyone has set up lines where they mark off, 6 feet, so people are waiting lines. There are ways to do this. So the people are able to get out to vote without risking anything. And we should allow people to vote by absentee ballot if they want to, but that doesn't mean we suddenly get rid of all the security in place to make sure that we have a secure election.
The premise the League of Women Voters and the ACLU used on the Commonwealth is sadly exactly what I warned, and I think you and I warned about in advance of the General Assembly session, where they eliminated the requirement for voter ID under some ridiculous, it's a poll tax nonsense, but they did it anyway. Elections #have consequences, but I guess that's their building block as well. You don't ask who they are when they show up to vote in the first place. So, why should you care who they are when they mail in their ballot?
Yeah, well, getting rid of the voter ID requirement itself was a huge mistake. And in fact, absentee ballot fraud is something that does happen in Virginia. We have cases of that in our Heritage Foundation voter fraud database, including a small town in Virginia where not too many years ago, 14 local people, and I think including the mayor, were all convicted of engaging in absentee ballot fraud to make sure they won elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see it, and you say, and it's bipartisan. I think it brought down a congressman in North Carolina because one of his campaign workers. Now, your report that's up at heritage.org, it's titled "America's Hidden Voting Epidemic: Mail Ballot Failures." Is based on some research done by noted right-wing zealots, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. So take us into some of what they found regarding this idea that we can just mail our ballots in and hope that what is the old phrase, the check's in the mail? I guess in this case the vote's in the mail.
No, that's right. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission collects data from the state after federal elections, and every 2 years they file a report, a very official report with the U.S. Congress. Apparently not a lot of people look at that report, but we did, and we discovered that when it comes to absentee ballots, the states will report, for example, how many were misdirected. In other words, they stuck the ballots in the mail to go to a registered voter, and the mail came back because the U.S. Postal Service says, well, no such person lives at that address. They also have a category of unknown. Unknown means that the states have no idea what happened to that ballot. They stuck it in the mail and never got a response from the voter, have no idea what happened to it, don't know if it was delivered. How many of those kind of ballots are there, misdirected or unaccounted for? In the 2016 election, remember, Hillary Clinton got 2.9 million more votes in the national popular vote than President Trump. Mm-hmm. However, there were 6.5 million ballots misdirected or unaccounted for by the states. So for every vote she was ahead of him, there were 2 votes that were misdirected or the state doesn't know what happened to them.
That is stunning. And you know something? If there were 6 million people who were told they weren't allowed to vote at the polling place, we'd have an ACLU march on Washington over it, and with all the requisite allegations of racism and sexism and every other ism you want to throw in there. But because this happened quietly and you almost don't know it didn't happen because it went through the Postal Service, you get no receipt or anything like that says you voted.
Right, and I don't know if people have seen this, but if they Google it very quickly, they'll find that there was this big push for folks to vote by absentee ballot in Wisconsin in their primaries that are going to the polls. Mm-hmm. And after the election was over, they found several boxes of ballots that the U.S. Postal Service had apparently forgot to deliver.
Well, it's happening all over the place. I mean, sadly, the U.S. Postal Service has been, held up as a reason to, avoid every government program from healthcare on down, Hans, because they struggle so mightily with their charge, which is just basically make sure my cards and letters get there, never mind important things like ballots. Whose idea is all this?
Well, it's really coming from the progressive left. They see this coronavirus as an opportunity to permanently change our election rules. And that's why, for example, the coronavirus bill that Nancy Pelosi tried to push through the House had all kinds of provisions in it that had nothing whatsoever to do with dealing with the coronavirus, like getting rid of all voter ID laws across the country, getting rid of any and all witness signature requirements on absentee ballots across the country, legalizing or making sure that every state had to legalize vote harvesting, which would allow anybody to come to your door to pick up your ballot, including candidates and people like that. Why in the world, in a supposed time of social distancing and the coronavirus, would liberals want to legalize people being able to come to your door to collect your ballot? Well, that's because when candidates and campaign workers come to your front door, are able to come to your front door, there's no telling what kind of pressure they may put on you as a voter to vote the way they want you to vote.
Hans Von Spakovsky is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, legal scholar, director of the Senior Legal Fellow with the Heritage Foundation and their Election Law Reform Initiative. We're talking about a piece that they have, he wrote along with also good friend Christian Adams about mail ballot failures. But Hans, let me up the ante on it, on the progressives. If mail-in ballots are so great, why don't we just do telephone ballots?
Well, look, there's been some push for that too, but that also is extremely dangerous. Look, every group that has looked at internet voting, telephone voting, like including the National Science Foundation, so very legitimate organizations, all of them have warned against moving to anything like that because they say the security problems inherent in that, particularly internet voting, are so great that there was no way you could guarantee the integrity of the election process if we did that.
Well, and absolutely, because when you do it in person, you're handing your ballot to someone else or scanning it into, I mean, I get enough of this just with the optical scanners saying, well, how do I know the thing scanned my ballot correctly, and how do I know what went onto it? But you have found, that there has been, even beyond this, the very things that we seek to avoid in our elections. You have instances reported in North Carolina, Mississippi, and Texas of vote buying, intimidation, and just straight up fraud, don't you?
Yeah, everything from campaign workers going into people's homes and basically filling out the ballot for the voter, intimidation and pressure of voters, or in some cases just outright theft of the ballots out of mailboxes, forging of voter signatures, completing the ballot, again by campaign volunteers and campaign workers, or vote buying. Listen, we just added a proven voter fraud case of a guy running for city council in New Jersey to our database. He was buying votes. Well, that's much easier to do in his case because he was buying absentee ballot votes. And with absentee ballots, you're able to guarantee that you're getting what you paid for because you can go into the person's home and see how they're filling out the ballot. And that's exactly what this guy was doing. You can't do that.
Yeah.
It's made more difficult when you disappear into a polling booth and the person trying to buy the vote, he can't guarantee that you're voting the way he's paying you to vote. Mm-hmm. So absentee balloting even makes vote buying easier.
I mean, some of this in an abstract becomes less important if these government offices don't traffic in so much money. But these offices, even at the local level, have become such directorates of slush funds under capital improvement budgets and other rainy day funds that these winning these seats becomes blood sport and now, straight up corruptibility.
Well, you're right about that. And in fact, years ago when I was still at the Justice Department, I was talking to a lawyer, longtime career professional at DOJ who'd been in charge of voter fraud prosecutions. And I asked him about this once. He said, there are so many places in the United States, particularly a lot of rural counties, where the source of money, the source of jobs is local county government. Mm-hmm. And that's why people are willing to cheat to win elections.
So what is the vox populi on this? I worry that it will be sold as it's so much easier, it's so much safer, it's all the things that the 3-in-1 floor wax dessert topping is sold under, and we're going to sell out our liberty for the convenience of I can just mail in my ballot as long as I mail it before 5 p.m. on the Monday before the Tuesday in November.
Well, I think, there is polling out on this, but I think it's somewhat deceptive. If you ask an ordinary person, should you be able to vote by mail? I think their initial reaction is, well, yeah, I ought to be able to do that. But when you educate them about the drawbacks of it and the problems of it, I think a lot of people then start to get a little bit leery of the idea and realize that it's not really such a good idea.
Well, and especially if you're a Democrat in a Republican county or a Republican in a Democratic city, you're going to feel like your vote you might as well just not vote.
Well, it's also the fact that one of the things we didn't talk about was the EAC reports also list huge numbers of absentee ballots being rejected. And people need to understand, when you mail in an absentee ballot, you have to fill out certain information, on the outside of the form. If you get any of that wrong, your ballot's going to be rejected. There's no election official there like there is in a polling place to fix any potential problems coming up. And people need to worry about that, too. Lots and lots of absentee ballots getting rejected because they don't meet the technical requirements of the law.
I hadn't thought about that. Heck, I had trouble at a gas station once because I did the zip code wrong for my house because I never write mail to myself, and that could be a real problem. So even without there being fraud, just lost votes from a natural, understandable human error.
No, that's exactly right, and that is also a problem. But again, what everyone has to remember is the whole problem with absentee ballots is they're being voted outside the supervision and assistance and help of election officials. And that's why there are so many problems, both intentional and unintentional, that can be caused by them.
Well, and at the end of the day, as clunky as the system is, your hands attached to your ballot until it goes into the voting machine is the best way to secure it, isn't it?
Yes, it most certainly is.
Well, so do you think that this is going to get worse before it gets better? Or do you think, because I feel like there's an awful lot of people who, because they have more time on their hands, are paying more close attention to some of this stuff, that when it comes across their desk, they say, whoa, not just no, but hell no. Or do you think it's going to go the other way, and they're doing such a successful job marketing this through the evening news and the fear tactics that people are going to be like, heck yeah, you know what, if I can mail in my ballot and not have to go and be near somebody who might have COVID-19, I'm all for it.
Well, I do think the scare tactics are winning to some extent. On the other hand, the person who's been the most vocal in the country about talking about the problems with mail-in ballots has been President Trump. Mm-hmm. He has said a lot about that, and I'm hopeful that as people get educated about this issue, they will realize it's not a good idea. But look, here's the other thing. The general election is November 3rd. Okay, that is 6 months away? And is there anybody out there listening to you and me talking right now who really thinks that we're all still going to be home in November? No. I don't think so. I think we're all going to be back at work, back at school. And if that's the case, why wouldn't we want to be back in our polling places casting our ballots?
Well, Hans, I heard over the weekend a couple of folks, New Jersey and Michigan governors, saying we're 2 years away from getting back to anything that would resemble normalcy. So, I mean, from your lips to their ears. Hey, real quick on a tangent, the governor of the Commonwealth chastised the General Assembly a little bit by signing an executive order after asking the General Assembly for permission to throw off our town elections, which were scheduled for May 5th. And he said, well, I want to cancel them and move them to November, which I think dilutes the power of a local election in the first place by lumping it together with the general. But he was going to take all ballots that had already been cast in the May 5th election and throw them out. And I just sat there gobsmacked at the fact that here's a guy that's of the party of every vote is precious, and whether an unborn baby's life is or not is irrelevant, but every vote is so precious, he's just going to throw out, in some cases, half a municipality's ballots.
Yeah, and that is really wrong. They should allow the local municipalities to make that decision. But like I said, why do that? Wisconsin, like I said, they didn't put off their primary. They held it, and they had turnout as almost equal to the 2008 turnout, and I just don't think that's a smart decision. But then remember, this is the same governor who, when he signed the repeal of the state's voter ID law, basically lied.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the voter ID laws disenfranchise individuals and disproportionately impact low-income individuals and racial minorities, keep them out of the polls. That is totally untrue. We have the turnout numbers to prove that, in fact, turnout went up after voter ID laws have gone in place in the states that have put them in. So he in other words, is basically telling a complete falsehood on that issue. So it's hard to trust him on anything else he's doing when it comes to voting and election.
Well, it's easy to hide it under the white sheet there, allegedly. Hans, and your point again, well taken, because I said, if there is anyone out there who has been turned away from a polling place, call me now. And nobody, there are no instances, there aren't even allegations of people being turned away from polling places.
Right.
So, where's this in an entire Commonwealth, 8 million people, somebody would have had a problem with it.
Yeah, but they didn't, which is frankly one of the reasons. Remember, liberals went to court to sue to stop the voter ID law in Virginia from going in place. They lost, and one of the reasons they lost the lawsuit was because they were unable to produce a single individual who would have been unable to vote because of the voter ID law.
It's true. Absolutely. Hans, again, it's heritage.org. It's under the banner Election Integrity. Great column. Thanks again for sharing it with us. We'll link back to it at our website and on our podcast as well. You have a great morning, sir, and thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Up next, Reopen Virginia on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.